Okay, welcome everyone. So excited to have you here. And I'm really excited about this conversation because it's a really unique opportunity to see what it's actually like to retool a customer data stack. Every company is somewhere on the journey of digital transformation, where that's going from sort of legacy technology to more modern technology and sort of making their initial steps, or moving towards more advanced architectures and workflows. And we're actually going to talk about both today, which is super exciting. And we have such a great crew here. We're going to talk with Brett, who's going to tell us how he approached re-architecting his data stack. And then we have both Snowflake and Iterable here on the webinar as well, who are going to talk about some of the unique specific things about their technologies. So we're going to get to hear all about both the process and the technology today. So super excited, and thank you everyone for joining. Okay, let's dive in. Whoops, I think I went one too far there. Okay. So we're just going to do some introductions. Brett, do you want to give us your background and tell us what you do at Joybird?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm Brett Trainey. I'm the director of analytics at Joybird. I'm responsible for kind of the whole data stack, everything from ETL pipelines through data warehousing and modeling, BI, and then as data fans out to other systems. So my team and I work really closely with all the business units to make sure that we're getting actionable data or actual insights out of our data, but I also work on kind of the architecture and system side to tie all these systems together.
So you are a busy man.
A little bit.
To say the least. All right, AJ, tell us about what you do at Snowflake.
Hey folks, AJ von Massenhausen here with Snowflake. Been here a while now. I started on the sales side, working directly with customers like Joybird. I have since moved over to our partnership organization, so managing go-to-market and the relationships with our partners like Iterable and RudderStack and others. So great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us. All right, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. I'm Kevin Zhao, partner technology partnership manager over at Iterable. I've been here for about 1.5 years, and in this role, I manage all new integrations as well as ongoing relationships with our strategic partners. So working with the likes of Snowflake and RudderStack to just drive the most strategic value to our mutual customers.
Great. And I'll be brief. I'm Eric. I'm the head of demand generation at RudderStack, but I also serve on the internal team that manages our own data stack. So I am in the weeds every day, although I don't have quite as much going on that front as Brett. So Brett, can you tell us about Joybird as a company? And would just love to know, sort of what are the data needs of the business relative to the business model?
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we were founded in 2014, which way back then, it was kind of a crazy idea that you could sell kind of high quality customized furniture online. Everybody likes to go in and sit on a couch, look at the colors, feel the texture. So Joybird started with kind of a very different idea to that. And it's been amazing growth and journey. We were acquired by La-Z-Boy a few years back. They obviously have a wonderful brick and mortar business that's a great complement to our e-commerce business. So between the two, we really try to meet customers wherever they are, either online or in store. And we do the bulk of our sales through our website still, but we do have retail stores, Joybird specific retail stores that are currently open and opening more in the near future. So we're really kind of bringing that, meeting customers wherever they are, whether they want to see it online, whether they want to see it in person, or somewhere in between. So this sort of creates a lot of interesting data needs for us. We have a lot of website analytics. We have hundreds of thousands of people going through our website, clicking on things, looking at furniture. But then we have those same folks that come into our stores, and we want to make sure that we understand what they need wherever they are. And so that's how we kind of came up upon the kind of event streaming and RudderStack and Iterable plan to kind of figure out how can we better serve our customers in this long journey that they have from seeing us on a Facebook ad through getting a couch delivered to them.
Fascinating. Yeah, it's so interesting to hear about that journey because, you know, let's say in the dot-com boom, you had all of these brick and mortar stores who were rushing to get online and sort of digitize, and the emergence of sort of an online only retail business that is now transitioning to offline is fascinating, right? The equation has flipped, and that creates some really interesting data needs.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you see that a lot now in D2C businesses. I think they're realizing that, you know, in-person brick and mortar is essential to kind of finding their customers. But yeah, we have this whole stack and system that was built solely to serve people online. And now we're like, okay, how do we pull this all together to make sure that it's also meeting their needs and communicating with them in person as well?
Love it. Okay, let's talk about the stack when you arrived at Joybird, because you hadn't closed the gap on that sort of unified view of the customer and your ability to communicate with them, you know, based on sort of the context of how they're interacting with you. So let's talk about the bad news first. What was it like when you got there? And we'd love to hear about both the technical sides, but then also how is that limiting? You have all these internal customers. You said you work with, you know, all these different functions. What were the technical limitations? And then what problems was that causing for those internal customers that you and your team serve?
Yeah, so I mean, the problems, you know, I would say that we had a really good stack for 2014, 2015 era, and we just hadn't taken the time to kind of upgrade it and kind of move it along as you know, new platforms and new things came out. So when I arrived at Joybird about a year and a half or so ago, we were using Bronto as our ESP, which is, you know, in 2014 land was a great ESP. One of the kind of leaders back then. They were acquired by Oracle. Things kind of stagnated. And what we had to do back then was really build out these direct connections from our backend, our own custom backend, into Bronto. And so every time that you wanted to populate a new field, you know, a customer has an open order, for example, like we don't want to send them marketing emails when they're waiting for their couch to get delivered. That was a custom connection between our backend engineers and our platform into Bronto. And you have to do that over and over and over again. So it was really kind of creaky. You know, the backend team was working with data that, you know, they only had access to what was in the backend. They didn't have access to anything that was happening on the website, anything that was happening on their system. So yeah, it was really creaky. And then we had segments set up, but we had never really fully kind of implemented it. We were firing some events. We had a few downstream destinations, but I think people didn't understand, you know, the value add of a CDP and how to fully kind of build it out. So our product team would, I think at one point we had maybe 3 different Google Analytics like properties that were getting data from 3 different places. So one was like a segment source, one was like direct from the website. Well, I don't know where the third one came from. I don't even want to know. But, you know, at any given time, someone would be like, oh, we had, you know, 100,000 people last month. Somebody say, no, we had 150,000 people. And somebody say we had 7 because they were looking at that third one that was like, you know, some test instance or something. So we couldn't really understand what was going on the website. It was a really long development process to get data from, you know, these traits and properties that we knew about our customer into our ESP. And we had a lot of things that we wanted to do for our customers. We wanted to personalize emails. We have hundreds of thousands of SKUs because we're custom. You know, the same couch that you see, you can have it in 45 different fabrics. You can have 3 different wood stains. You can have different dimensions. You can have different orientations. So we really want to really personalize that for the customer based on what they were interested in on our website, what they might sign up for a product alert, something like that. And we couldn't do that with our current stack. And then with those actions and what people are doing, all these disparate systems were getting different information. We used to use, back then, we used Zendesk as our CRM. We now use customer with a K, but, you know, somebody with an open order in Zendesk might look very different than someone with an open order in Bronto. And so, you know, our customer service team would say, hey, it looks like you have an open order. And then we'd be sending them like a marketing email, you know, because things just weren't in sync and we didn't have that unified like event stream.
Yep. Boy, those Slack messages are the worst to get.
Yeah, and then you're digging and digging. You're like, why is this? Right. And you're like looking at old PHP code, and you're just like, what's going on here? So, you know, we couldn't make business decisions in a unified way. And then the marketing team had a lot of initiatives where they're just like, hey, we want to try XYZ. and you're like, okay, well, let's start the process. Our engineering teams are amazing, but they have other priorities as well. So a one-off marketing campaign that you just want to test to see if it's going to hit isn't going to raise that level of like, hey, we get it done in a day.
Sure, right. Because like the opening a ticket for that is, it's almost like the juice isn't worth the squeeze, right? Man, okay, so I think I'm having some PTSD, and I'm sure some of the listeners are having PTSD as well. Okay, so you came in, and one of your big initiatives was, there are data issues here, and then also it sounds like silo issues, integrations issues. So you said, we're going to re-architect this stack. So first of all, tell us, before we get into the specifics, I'd love to know how you thought about, your mission to do this. Like, what were some of the sort of key, maybe philosophical convictions you had about the way that you were going to re-architect the stack?
Yeah, and I do want to pause and say, like, on the technical side, I think all of this is really interesting. But what was our guiding light here was like, how do we get business value out of this? You can do really cool things with technology, but it wasn't the case where like we want to do it just because it's cool. We want to meet our customers in a certain way. We want to grow revenue. We have these business objectives. So we really approached re-architecting this from a business point of view versus a technical point of view. And so the things that we really wanted out of it was, a more modern platform to communicate with our customers, a unified event stream. So we wanted to make sure that an order completed event in Facebook was an order completed event in GA, was, in Iterable. Like, we wanted to make sure that these all were the same thing. And we wanted to make sure it was scalable over time. So it wasn't we didn't want to go through all this effort just to say, oh, we got to this point, but now we have to do all these custom connections over and over and over again, and we're just stuck in this cycle again. So we wanted to kind of build for the future. And a lot of this was to really unlock value for our customers. I think discovery specifically is difficult when we have so many SKUs and so many products and so many things changing. So we wanted to make sure that we were getting customers information about new products, upcoming products, things they might be interested in that they hadn't necessarily considered before. So a lot of this was really, those singular things, but then just serving the customer better.
Totally. Yeah, I love that perspective, because when you talk about the business context, it's more than just making it easier to do the basics, right? Where we don't send a marketing email if someone has a order that's, in progress of being shipped, right? I mean, that's sort of like table stakes, right? Just, not giving a bad experience. But I love the perspective of, no, let's go beyond that and actually start to think about making connections, recommendations, and like actually proactively improving the customer experience with data and pushing that value back into downstream teams.
Yeah, because I think in today's world, it's, relatively easy to collect a ton of data about a lot of different things, but getting that data back to your business and the consumer is just key, right? It's like, we're not doing this just for the sake of collecting data. We really want to get business value out of it. So our marketing team specifically was really constrained by the ability, we couldn't personalize things. We couldn't really send out things that we knew customers would be interested in. We are stuck in this kind of like batch and blast world of just like, hey, like hoping it kind of sticks. And so that was really the impetus for a lot of this. And so, yeah, as it says on the slide, obviously, we switched from Bronto to Iterable and Segment to RudderStack. And this may be a Joybird thing. This is probably at a lot of companies, but we're like, hey, if we're going to change one thing, let's change 100 things and just like make this like, just do everything all at once and take on this huge project. So it was really great because it brought together a lot of different teams, like our front and back end engineering team, our marketing team, our digital product team. They all came together to kind of do these two things together, because building out a new like modern unified event stream is great, but if you don't have the ESP to action off of it, it's not worthwhile. Sure. And if you have this amazing new ESP that can do all these kinds of things, but you're still like, hey, it's going to take us a month to feed in like one data point, then that's not worth it either. So we decided to do both at the same time because we couldn't really have one without the other. And so, yeah, we, our engineering team took a big chunk of time to really think out like, what is that full customer journey? What does that look like in the front and back end, and build out those events to really encapsulate that whole journey. And it's complicated, right? Because, we have a long buying cycle, our product takes a long time to get delivered. So there's a lot of those touch points along the way. And we'd use those events to really drive those actions in those downstream destinations. And we chose Snowflake as our data warehouse. We had been using them previously, and it's just a great choice because it's one of those things, it's just, you don't really have to manage it. It was something that was there and it was always available to us, but it just worked as it was. And we knew that when it came time to getting data back into these systems, that would be the great place to do it, because we'd have data from not just the website, but from Iterable, from customer with a K, from our backend, where we can create these really complex segments and different business logic using dbt as our modeling layer. So we knew that that would always be there for us. So we use that as like our foundation for all this work. And then, yeah, once that event stream was up and running, we had some very one-off things to send out a transactional email when, XYZ happened, but we did have this unified event stream that was very e-commerce based that we could then use in these other downstream destinations like Facebook, other ad platforms. We use we use Qualtrics for surveys. We have all these different sources that consume this standardized data, and we know that everybody's getting that same information.
Sure. And just one quick question. So Snowflake was already in place, but it sounds like, the sort of some of the more legacy tools around it were there was a big effort to get data in. So you migrate to the stack and now you have all this data in Snowflake. Did it also impact the way that you approached analytics out of the warehouse? Because it was already there and I'm sure some of that was happening, but now you have sort of this unified stream of data. We'd just love to hear about that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, all the data from RudderStack that we're capturing from the front end, back end obviously goes into Snowflake. And so, I think there's a lot of tools that are really good, like Google Analytics. We use PostHog and Indicative, which I think you'll see some of our downstream destinations. Those are really great for certain use cases, but a lot of times you're like, hey, we need to really dive into this, like what's actually happening on these two pages with these users and this A/B test or something. So capturing all that data in Snowflake and really tying that like singular identity, so we know that the customer on our website is the same one that placed an order, is the same one in customer, and creating that singular customer profile, it really unlocked a lot of value for us, both analytically, because we have a better understanding of our customer and our business. But once we build out those dimensions and those models, we can then feed those back into the system again to say, hey, we actually want to use that in Iterable, or hey, we need to flag these customers in customer with a K because they need additional follow-up or something. So it unlocked a lot of value, both analytically and kind of operationally.
Love it. And I cannot wait to hear about closing the loop with getting the data out of Snowflake. Okay, so give us a quick run through of the stack. Lots of tools here, but would just love to know, just kind of give us a quick walkthrough.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, we obviously RudderStack kind of sits in the middle of all this event work. So on the front end, we use a JavaScript front end. So we're always instrumenting and sending events from there. Our backend is built in PHP. And then we have some one-off applications that we use a Python SDK for. But we instrument and send all those events from those three sources directly into RudderStack. And those kind of we call it like the fast lane and the slow lane. So from RudderStack, the fast lane is in real time, we're going into things like Iterable or Indicative. We use AWS Personalized to do on-site recommendations for folks because, again, discovery is so difficult. So that's kind of the fast lane where the real-time data goes into those downstream sources. The slower lane is where that data is also then captured into Snowflake, and then we start to build models and analytics on top of that, which then gets pushed back into RudderStack and down into the reverse ETL pipeline, where we might want to compute things like, if somebody has an open order or a lifetime value or something that couldn't be done in real time. So yeah, and we turn these destinations on and off, which has been really great to like test and fiddle with stuff. It's just made it so much easier to kind of work off of this architecture versus these one-off connections for everything.
Yeah, makes total sense. Love the fast lane and the slow lane. Initially, I was a little bit confused just because we have customers who send data to Snowflake like physically super fast, but it makes sense that you collect all the data there, you're creating value with it, and then syndicating it back from the stack. So there's a longer cycle there as you sort of process and analyze the data. Love it. That's a really helpful analogy. Okay, so you get the stack done, you pulled the Band-Aid off, you redid a ton of infrastructure all at once. And so now you are running, what, all of us call the modern data stack. So how has it changed things for your team and then also for the downstream teams?
Yeah, so for our team, as it shows, obviously 93% reduction in engineering time. We no longer have to build those singular one-off connections anymore where you're looking at API docs and building out processes and systems. We just kind of turn it on and it works, which is great. And we have all those events ready to go. On the iterable side, on average, it used to take from a marketing request into Bronto for a dimension, it used to take on average 2 weeks for something like, hey, lifetime value or whatever that might be. And that's not to say anything about our backend team. They're amazing, but they just have to like piece out those requirements and build that connection. Now we can do it in an hour or less in most cases because we have that data in Snowflake modeled out, ready to go. And then we just send it back through the reverse ETL pipeline through RudderStack and into Iterable, and it shows up in an hour. Like we can get the whole cycle done in an hour. So they can launch campaigns so much faster and just test stuff, right? Without having to put all their chips on like a singular dimension. And then on the Snowflake side, once we did that work to kind of instrument our site and build everything out, we spent very little time on actually implementing events. It's very streamlined now. We might fiddle with a property here and there, or the product team might add something new, but it's really just up and running and we're getting a lot of actionable data off of it with very little maintenance now. So no more like, hey, why does GA say this? Why is that? We have a clear understanding of where everything lives and we can really troubleshoot immediately. So it's saved our engineering team a ton of time in terms of like just doing events and figuring out what's going on with our stack.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing that I think in many ways it's easy to take for granted if you work with a lot of these modern tools. But even when you do make changes, say in the events, there is zero configuration or update in Snowflake. Everything just flows through automatically, which is really nice because you don't have to worry about that, right? It just, the schema is updated automatically, and then you can sort of incorporate that in whatever models you have, on your data layer, which definitely, yeah, now that I think about it, it's like, man, that's a huge difference, right? It's like you instrument something and then it just flows through. You don't have to actually manage dependencies, downstream, which is really cool. Man, This is 2 weeks to 1 hour. That's still blowing my mind.
Yeah, it's a huge win. And I think that there's, especially in marketing, you never know what's going to work. So this just allows us to iterate and cycle so much faster on so many things. And really just say, when a question comes up, the answer isn't like maybe, or we'll get back to you, but it's like, yes, we can do that. And it'll be there in an hour or two, just to really serve the business much faster.
Yeah, love it. Okay, we talked about this, but I'll cover it briefly. And this is really where we're going to start to dig into some of the specifics of how these tools accomplish it. So I'll talk a little bit about RudderStack, AJ will talk about Snowflake, and Kevin will talk about Iterable, and then we'll do some Q&A. But this is really, interestingly, so many companies, I think, still live, even if they have, a data layer or a CDP, so many companies still live in a batch and blast world, right? Where you sort of ingest data, and then you put it into an ESP and you're sending out these messages to, sort of whatever segment of customers, get that. But it's very linear. You can only use behavioral data. And then you can't build more complex segments, right? So it really is a spray and pray methodology. This is where a lot of companies are moving to, which is great. So this is way better, right? You're not only pulling in behavioral data, but then you're also pulling in data from other platforms, right? So you could pull in data from your ad platforms, from your other cloud tools. You're unifying that in Snowflake, and Snowflake really becomes sort of the place where you build the interesting segments based on all this data, not just the behavioral data. And then you can push all of those rich profiles into a tool like Iterable that now allows you to do much more advanced engagement, cross-platform, and just be much more intelligent with your marketing. We're going to hear more about that from Kevin. But what's interesting about this, and I think this is where it's really exciting of how all these modern tools tie together, is that the messages that you're sending are also actually really important data points on the customer journey, right? So this is still on some level a terminal destination for your data. And so what we want to dig through on how and specifically on how the tools help accomplish this. Yeah, so you can see there, those messages ultimately need to get back into the system to fully inform the customer journey. Sorry, I keep double clicking there. And so this is really, I think for both data teams and marketers, sort of the pinnacle of what the modern data stack can do in terms of connecting the entire customer journey in what we call a feedback loop. So you have behavioral data and other customer data flowing into Snowflake. Snowflake can push those things into a tool like Iterable, so you have all of the context there. But then also Iterable can feed engagement data back into the system, right? So if a particular campaign is performing really well for a particular segment, you can actually pull that data into Snowflake and include that in future iterations of segmentation. And so it becomes a self-optimizing system. The better that things get in Iterable, the better that you can build your segmentation and your complete customer profiles in Snowflake. And so this feedback loop, to your point, Brett, enables like really fast testing cycles, but then also continues to feed the system with data that helps you make better and better decisions over time. So this is the architecture that is obviously making a huge difference at companies like Joybird. I'll talk a little bit about RudderStack. Brett, you already mentioned a couple of things, and then let's dive into some of the specifics of the other tools. So RudderStack is, a lot of people call us a CDP. Practically, like Brett said, we move data. So the primary thing we do is collect that unified event stream from all of your sources and feed that to all of your downstream destinations. And I love the way that Brett said sort of the fast lane, where literally in real time, we can send behavioral events to tools like Iterable that can trigger, sort of immediate messaging based on a user's behavior. And then the slow lane, where you can send all that data to Snowflake. And then we also have a reverse ETL pipeline that pulls that data out of Snowflake and then syndicates it back to the stack. So a really common use case for this would be something like, sort of pulling in inventory data, transactional data, and the behavioral data, and coming up with a particular sort of segment of customers that's really hard to build if you don't have all of that data in a unified place. If you do have all that data in Snowflake, you can build these really interesting segments, and then our reverse ETL pipeline can actually push those back to an Iterable, so that Iterable can actually message and action on those segments. So that is what RudderStack does. AJ, do you want to talk about how Snowflake fits into the picture and maybe some of the specific features that enable this architecture?
Sure do. Thank you, Eric. Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, Snowflake Data Cloud is one global unified system connecting companies and data providers to the most relevant data for their business. So wherever data or users live, Snowflake delivers a single and seamless experience across multiple clouds, eliminating all previous silos. And we've made a huge effort in the past year to build industry-specific data clouds so that we can drive value for each of our customers' specific business needs. And the retail data cloud is the curation of all the data cloud capabilities, the platform features, data providers, data services, industry solutions, applications, and partners that address the unique pain points and challenges for the retail and consumer goods industry. So here we have the retail data cloud comprised of three main components, as you see here. The core Snowflake platform capabilities relevant for retail and CPG organizations, new industry tailored solutions from Snowflake and our partners like RudderStack and Iterable, and critical industry data sets natively hosted in Snowflake's data cloud so that customers like Joybird can easily access and join data from their suppliers and other partners as well. So we can go to the next slide, Eric. And yeah, with the retail data cloud, businesses are democratizing access to data, ensuring data governance and compliance, and empowering business solutions, such as increasing personalization across channels, optimizing supply chain operations, and making data-driven merchandising decisions. And I love the example of Joybird's ability to realize a 15x reduction in development time, just as a testament to how our customers realize true business value with Snowflake.
Love it. I think we already have a couple questions. We'll push those to the Q&A. Thank you so much, though, AJ. All right, Kevin, tell us how Iterable fits into the architecture.
Of course. Yeah, now that we're a bit more familiar with how modern brands are connecting and managing all their data sources across the stack, let's zoom in on how modern brands also use that data to hydrate very much mission critical destination, their customer engagement platform. So first off, for those of you unfamiliar with Iterable, we're a cross-channel platform that empowers brands to orchestrate personalized marketing campaigns across the entire user journey. But put very simply, Iterable allows brands to send the right message at the right time to the right user via the right channels. And you can see some of those channels and data sources illustrated on this screen. Next slide, please. But honestly, like, why is this important though, right? In this digital era, people's relationships with brands have really fundamentally changed. Leading brands understand that the key to creating customer loyalty and maintaining that loyalty is to create an emotional connection through joyful experiences. So, and however, and this is a theme that Brett's been touching upon earlier in today's webinar, there's now a gap between the data and the engagement channels where customers live. And you can see some of those engagement channels at the bottom that we manage through Iterable. That makes creating these joyful experiences just so incredibly hard. As a result, many brands now struggle to drive growth in the digital world. Iterable comes in, we close that gap, and we allow brands to help deliver these joyful experiences at massive scale. And some of those channels that we manage currently, Joybird's leveraging us for email, but we manage customer experiences across all these different channels: email, push, in-app, web push, what have you. Let's loop now back to Eric to help us summarize briefly.
Absolutely. And I'll be brief here because I'm excited to get to the Q&A. Really, what we see here in this architecture, as we summarize it, is one of the foundations here is real-time event streaming, right? Capturing every touch point of the customer as they engage with your website, app, digital properties, and then to Brett's point, even offline in physical environments, right? And capturing some of those data points as well. When you can stream all of that data, both in real time for, as Brett said, the fast lane to do, sort of behavior-based real-time triggering, but then also the slow lane of actually syndicating that to the warehouse and then building interesting use cases on top of that and then syndicating it back. That real-time behavioral event stream is really key to sort of understanding the entire customer journey. Continuous data loops. We talked about, and this is actually one really, really fascinating characteristic of the modern stack, especially with a tool like Snowflake in the middle. So when you have advanced engagement tools, they are both a destination and a source in this modern architecture, right? And so the distinction of sort of that linear flow that we saw, where you have user performs an action, data is collected, it's sent to a tool, a message is sent. Now it becomes a continuous data loop, right? Where the end destination actually becomes a source for the stack as well. And you can create much more powerful optimizations as the data flows through the loops and teams learn more. And then, of course, advanced engagement tooling, right? You can have all of the data and the infrastructure to build all of these interesting segments and traits and all of those things. But if you don't have a tool that is powerful enough to deliver those messages cross-platform, then you're still essentially just feeding better data into a linear, batch and blast, tactic. And really, the modern customer journey has gotten really complex, right? Cross-device, online and offline. All of these different systems that we use to track the various touch points on their customer journey, it's pretty complex, right? And so having modern tooling that actually allows you to send the right message at the right point throughout that complex journey is key. So with that, we're going to do a Q&A. So Kevin is going to do a Q&A with Brett and dig in a little bit on some specifics. I saw that we already had a couple questions coming in, but any attendees, please put your questions in the Q&A, and we will leave some time at the end to answer any of your questions. Kevin and Brett.
Thanks, Eric. Yeah, if we could just pop over to the next slide, have a little bit of a background as we chat. So we talked a bit about what Iterable does on a high level, what our strategic value is to brands. But I think it's also much more valuable to dig into the details and figure out what of those aspects Joybird leveraged. So yeah, we're going to bring back Brett from Joybird. Before we kick it off, set the scene for us, Brett. Tell us about your email experience pre-Iterable.
Yeah, those are the days, the dark days that we don't like to talk about as much. But, like I said, it was very kind of, it was just difficult to use. I think we didn't have a lot of visibility aside from high level metrics about sends and opens and these types of things. We didn't understand really how customers were interacting with email in the depth we wanted to. And, our previous platform, it was really difficult to even pull up a user profile. It may take 2 to 3 minutes sometimes to, we had a lot of data in there, but it was just really difficult to understand how people were interacting with email and where those business value or business opportunities were in the platform we were on.
Gotcha. That sounds like a common pain that a lot of our customers deal with when they come over to us. So I'm sure I can imagine some of the reasons here why, but really got to ask you, you mentioned that you wanted to find a more modern platform. What led you to choose Iterable?
Yeah, this is obviously speaking from the data persona point of view. Iterable is amazing with like flexible data. So it takes in JSON that we send and we have very nested properties. We have complex data structures because our customers interact with a lot of products and we have a lot of SKUs and do a lot of stuff. So we really wanted a platform that would allow us to kind of start sending in complex data and figure out what to do with it as the time came versus scoping out all those use cases ahead of time. So Iterable, we can work with these nested properties. We can key off of things that are 5 levels down in the JSON objects that we send in and generate really complex workflows off of that. So that was from the data point of view, that was something that we wanted to kind of future-proof as our business got more and more complicated. And then there's, as Eric kind of said earlier, the table stakes kind of stuff. We actually built a system in our backend to switch email sending for all of our transactional emails from Bronto to a second ESP because Bronto was going down so much. We just couldn't rely on to send, you just bought a $5,000 couch and you don't get an order confirmation, because Bronto just decided to go down for a day or a week. That was really frustrating for us. So we just were looking for a partner that, had a lot of just good SLAs in place, a really modern platform, something that we could depend on. So those were the 2 key decision points from my point of view as a data person.
I can only imagine what those support tickets must have looked like. I don't envy your customer support team there.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
yes. Yeah. So earlier you also touched on this a little bit. We talked on the reasons why you selected Iterable, but time to value is a big motivator for making that switch. So I really love that highlight where you were able to save that 2 weeks worth of time building these email campaigns. Could you tell us a bit more about this win and how it might have enabled other adjacent wins?
Yeah, definitely. So to kind of hone in on a really specific use case we had, because we now have this retail footprint, we know, our customers, when they sign up with us, will give us their address and they might be retail adjacent at that point. They might be actually very close to a store, but may not be aware of it. So what we wanted to do was calculate a customer's distance from their home address to a store. And if they happen to be close to a store, maybe they would want to come in, and maybe they'd want a different communication stream or different personalization based on that proximity to a store. It wouldn't make sense to do that for everybody, because you don't want to tell someone in Montana, like, hey, come to the store in New York City. So we were able to, using Snowflake as our data platform, calculate those distances for everybody and then push them back into Iterable. Again, all the request came in like, hey, can we calculate these distances? We want to tailor these emails. We had the distances calculated already. We sent that back through reverse ETL into Iterable, and we were able to get that within an hour or two and start personalizing a lot of different email campaigns based on someone's proximity to the store. And that's scalable because as we add new stores, we're just adding a new dimension at that point versus a whole new system to push that data again. So it was huge for us. And that was like the first big win we had once we migrated over Iterable, of like, hey, this is here, let's use it right away.
Right. I really love how this is illustrating, none of our platforms exist in a vacuum. We're all part of this interconnected data stack, this modern tech stack, as we've been talking about. Well, finally, for me, we're talking about the current state. We talked about, what happened previously. Let's talk about the future. What are some projects that you now feel enabled to really roll out with Iterable, with this modern data stack that you weren't able to do before? What do you have cooking up back there?
Yeah, so to kind of key on that retail website connection again, when folks come into our retail store, they might not be ready to purchase at that point, and they want to send their cart to themselves. So that's always an email that's existed for us. But what we wanted to do was really spark, as you said, joy and that communication between our business and our customer. So we have scoped out to really tailor those emails based on the retail associate that person worked with and the stuff that they have in their cart, to now create a conversation between customers rather than just a transactional email. It's like, hey, here's your $10,000 cart. We'll never hear from you again. So this is something that we have a lot of these projects that are scoped to say, how do we better meet customers where they are and communicate with them rather than just send them a message. So that's an example that's actually like up and running now that we're pushing into production. We want to have a tighter integration between what happens in email and then direct mail, and Iterable makes it super easy because it's just a kind of point and click integration with our direct mail partner. And then we have other things that are coming down the pike, like getting people to our distribution centers if there's a flash sale or something. We're just much more agile and able to kind of alert customers to opportunities that they wouldn't know about before. So it's the same theme, but really just getting all this data into Iterable and then taking action off of it in a really quick way.
That's really cool to see. I mean, I'm sure we've all been doing a lot of digital shopping in the last 2 years or so, but to see this kind of come into fruition for Joybird, I mean, that's really rad. Thank you.
Yeah.
So those are all the questions from my side. Let's roll it back to, I guess, Eric at this point.
Whoops, sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much. We'll do some Q&A from the audience. So please put your questions. Please put your questions in the Q&A. Feel free to ask any question you want. AJ, Kevin, Brett, myself, of course. Here's a question that came in for Brett, which this is a really good question. So, how do you decide what data you're going to sort of instrument and send via the real-time event stream versus what you're going to send via reverse ETL, because there's sort of work involved on both sides. Do you have a strategy since you're sort of populating Iterable both from the SDK sources and then also Snowflake?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So anything we can send in real time, we would. And those are kind of those singular actions, like someone viewed a product or somebody added a product to cart. So those are all sent in real time and they're key to the customer journey in that moment. Anything with reverse ETL we would do is where we're blending data from those different sources. So not just the website, but from our backend, from customer or CRM platform, from Iterable, from an ad platform, those types of things that it can't rely on just a single point of data. So at that point, we blend data together from a lot of different sources to come up with these kind of composite metrics. Because for us to calculate whether someone has an order delivered or not, we need to get data from our shipping partners. We need to get data from our backend. We need to get data from like a customer signature or something. So those are the things that we send through reverse ETL, where we need to pull different data points together to calculate something versus it just happening in real time.
Got it. That makes total sense. More questions, which is great. This is a great question. Every change brings its own issues and challenges. Which is a great point. So you implemented this new stack. What are the challenges that you're facing with it? You have experienced so many gains, but are there any challenges?
Yeah, I think it's definitely a sea change, kind of going from something like Bronto to Iterable. And I think in that case, the visibility of people moving through workflows and how we're sending out emails, the fact that we can see all that makes us understand that maybe some of the ways that we set up events, like our own business logic, we could refine, or things that we may want to do differently. Really harnessing that power, I think, comes, you have to think through it. It's more complexity, but more value as well. And then, I think that there's always some complexity or some challenges when you talk about like front end tracking and understanding these event streams and when things are happening. So a lot of times, A/B testing, these types of things, like we experience some challenges just because it's the nature of the game to understand where people are on the site and where they're moving through and what we want to show them. So there's always some complexity with that, but we definitely have more visibility into understanding where those challenges are, and we can kind of tackle them versus just not even knowing they exist.
Makes total sense. With great power comes great responsibility.
Exactly.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Another really good question here. How did you capture events pre-RudderStack? And what was the lift on the front-end engineering team to re-tag the site and instrument all of those, that unified event stream that you talked about?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, we had Segment kind of like 30% stood up like for a long time at the company. So we had a base of events that, a kind of basic e-commerce flow, but they weren't really firing correctly. I will say we leveraged a partner, they're called Avo, and they helped us kind of create a tracking plan and instrument that tracking plan in code. So the initial lift to get this all off the ground, to kind of tie Avo and RudderStack and then the SDKs together, it took a month or two, I would say, and not a month or two of like pure engineering time, but a month or two to walk our engineers through all that and like kind of come up with that plan. But once we got going and started instrumenting those events, it went really quickly. It was kind of like walk, and then run, and then we're there. And like I said, now that whole system of creating an event in Avo, developing it in RudderStack, and then sending it downstream is all really streamlined. We can do a new event in a single sprint, and it just takes an hour or two. And I will say the RudderStack team were great partners, kind of helping us understand where we might have gone wrong sometimes, which was really helpful, as you're getting a new system up and running.
Yeah, that's interesting. Just to add on to that, it's an interesting dynamic to see that the actual dev work isn't hard. It's the planning and what's your taxonomy and data types and all of those sorts of things. And so the planning up front is really, it's sort of what unlocks the value. It takes a lot more time. It's like the thinking work is almost harder than the actual instrumentation.
Yeah, and if I could say, if you're scoping a project like this, definitely talk with folks like RudderStack early to get that taxonomy and understand your business model, because it does require a lot of discussion with business users and understanding like how your business flows. The actual dev work involved once they get going with SDKs is, it's pretty streamlined at this point.
Yeah. Okay, another really good question here. So where are unified profiles created? Is it Snowflake? And how does Snowflake know that the event stream data is from the same user, say cross-platform or whatever? So really good. I mean, a couple of questions there. So I guess first, unified profiles, are they in Snowflake?
They are, yeah. So we build all of our data models in Snowflake, and those unified profiles live there. We have what's called like a kind of customer fact table, which ties together facts from all these different sources. So that all lives in Snowflake, and it's a great question around how do you like match IDs and profiles from different systems. I would say it really depends on the system. On the RudderStack side, obviously we have a front end, like on the front end, we know they have like an anonymous ID and a user ID if they're known to us. We can kind of trace that back as they take actions in our backend system to connect those profiles. And then customer authenticating Iterable may have, email as a primary key. So we do a lot of data modeling to understand where those profiles live in each system and tie them all together to a singular thing. And this is what's great about this stack is that we do that kind of work, which is like a really huge business add or business value to understand where customers are in all these platforms versus all this data engineering and other stuff. Because once we have all those that unified profile across all these systems, we can really easily tie together things like number of pages visited, number of products viewed, number of support tickets opened, number of emails opened in the last month. All these things kind of live on a singular line for a customer. And we spend our time doing that work, which is really much more beneficial for the business.
Sure, I love it. AJ, would love to hear from you. And this is both, I think, helpful for everyone, but also just a personal curiosity. How this seems to be the new standard in unifying the customer profile. Are you seeing this at Snowflake? I mean, we see this, I mean, all of our customers are essentially, sort of doing something similar, but would love to hear what you're seeing from the Snowflake side.
Totally. Yeah, our goal is to be the single source of truth, and we're, building up our relationships with partners in the ecosystem to make sure we integrate with everyone so that everyone can get their data into Snowflake. And so yeah, we're seeing more and more, especially as customers continue to move to the cloud and need that single source of truth for all their data coming from everywhere. That is the goal, and we're trying to help our customers achieve that for sure.
Awesome. All righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining. We will send a follow-up email both with a copy of this recording and contact information for everyone on the call, so you can dig in if you have additional questions. And I think we will give you a couple minutes back today, unless there are any more questions. So thank you everyone for joining, AJ, Kevin, Brett, and to all the attendees.